the situation that always occurs when there is a martial law imposed in any country. The situation facing the military, what should they do? Whose side should they take? And it is a dilemma for the military. Of course, we have in liberal democracies, we have a civilian law, a civilian rule over the military, so the military doesn't just go off and do its own thing. But what happens when the civilians that under whom the military operates, when they quarrel? And this is the situation we have in South Korea now.
In a televised address earlier, Yoon Suk-yeol said the move to impose martial law was necessary to defend the country's constitutional order.
I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces, to eradicate the despicable pro-North Korean anti-state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people, and to protect the free constitutional order.
That's Yoon Suk-yeol, the president of South Korea, declaring martial law. We can still, first of all, let's consult Greg Scarlatoiu, the vice president on the executive board of the International Council of Korean Studies. Good afternoon to you, Greg.
The pleasure is all mine. Good afternoon to you.
It's good to have you with us, Greg, and I'm sure very useful. I mean, my first question is, what is going on? I know that you are in touch, Greg, with contacts on the ground there in Seoul, the South Korean capital. We can see the pictures where I'm sitting of a crowd seems to be mobbing the parliament. I've seen snatched reports of the military attempting to force its way inside the parliament. Now, what are you picking up on what is happening?
Of course, this is a rather dramatic development. South Korea is an economic powerhouse, a very modern country. This is the first time in 44 years that we see martial law being declared in South Korea. Martial law has been declared in South Korea 10 times, going all the way back to 1948. So I think that it's very important to look and listen to what President Yoon had to say. What he said was that the martial law is aimed at eradicating pro-North Korean forces and to protect the constitutional order of freedom. This comes from his televised address. Why is this happening? Well, the opposition Democratic Party of Korea decided to railroad a downsized budget bill in the Parliamentary Budget Committee. And the DP, the Democratic Party, also submitted impeachment motions against the state auditor and the chief prosecutor. So, is this related to North Korea, to the ever-present and clear danger that South Korea faces? Well, in a way it is. If the legislative branch prevents the executive branch from exercising its responsibilities. So this is the rationale behind this move. Why martial law? Why the troops in the streets? Because the South Korean National Assembly, and remember, the opposition has a majority. The National Assembly can actually overturn and override this decision to proceed with martial law. They need 151 votes out of 300. Thus, the military is out in the streets trying to prevent DP members, Democratic Party members of the National Assembly, from basically entering the building. Is this a tough predicament? Yes, it is. I'm the president and CEO of a human rights organization. We have been great admirers of South Korean democracy and human rights. South Korea was over the times when martial law was instated.
Yeah.
So all I can say, by the way, I'm going to South Korea in 3 days. I'm traveling there. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now. This is where our office is. I've been on the phone with people in South Korea for hours now. All I can hope for is that this is going to turn out to be all peaceful. We don't want to see any kind of trouble in the streets.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, hopefully we can keep in touch. Let me just make that point now. When you go to Seoul, and you can give us your impressions of what is happening there. Who knows where we will be in 3 days' time. Just to disentangle where we are now, the president of South Korea, then, Yoon Suk-yeol, has been under an enormous amount of domestic political pressure since the general election in which the opposition party took control of the legislature. That led to something of a standoff. Actually, since then, the president has been vetoing legislation after legislation in a sort of standoff with the opposition-controlled parliament. He's been in all sorts of trouble. He's been personally in trouble, allegations against him and his conduct. And today, things very much come to a head with the declaration of martial law, and things have spiraled rapidly since then, to the point that we now see the military in the parliament. We see the parliament sitting as I speak, seeking to overturn the declaration of martial law. And there's talk of tanks and troops on the streets, not because of disorder on the streets of the capital, but because this extreme political crisis seems to be emanating out from the very centre of the city, the legislature. Do stay with us, Greg, if you can. I want to get the thoughts now, if I can, of Elizabeth Braw, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good afternoon to you, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon.
So tell me, what are you making of what you are seeing? We're all seeing the same images pretty much as I speak to you. What do you think of what is going on?
Well, it's an extraordinary development, and what makes it so shocking, like your previous guest said, is that it's happening in a stable liberal democracy where such things are not supposed to happen. And indeed, it's extremely rare for martial law to be imposed in a liberal democracy. When there are disagreements, they are usually resolved through negotiations or new elections. But this is where we are. And what makes it so concerning is that the Korean Peninsula is a relatively an increasingly unstable place on the planet. To begin with, North Korea has been increasing its collaboration with Russia, and there is some sort of quid pro quo that saw North Korea send soldiers to Ukraine. What Russia is doing in return, or will do in return, we don't know, but it's not going to be good for South Korea, which was the first country Western country to loudly raise the alarm about this deal. So it's not a good situation for the Korean Peninsula, and it's not a good situation for the world, because we're seeing this as the latest. This is the latest installment of in a long range of crises and conflicts that have erupted in the past couple of years.
Right. And Greg, where does this leave the people of South Korea, the people of the capital? Watching, there's a large crowd at the parliament, but we haven't seen any reports so far of violence or disorder on the streets. The force that is now, we can see on our TV screens, we're seeing reports of a military presence on the streets of the capital. We've seen no reports of any of that being needed or being used. What on earth will the people of Korea be making of seeing their democracy melting down in this way, Greg?
Well, certainly, this is not 1980. This is not the year when the Gwangju uprising happened, when martial law was declared. This is, again, a very modern country, a highly developed country. And all we can hope and pray for is that this is going to be a peaceful process. Again, for me, as a human rights advocate, I'm in a very tough position. We have been advocating for the rights of the people of North Korea. We see that things are not exactly perfect in South Korea either. So there are arguments to be made on both sides. So on the Democratic Party side, this is not the way you run a democracy, by declaring martial law. On President Yoon Suk-yeol's side, basically, the DP made it impossible to run the executive branch of the South Korean government.
Yes.
Is this a national security issue? Yes, it is. In the United States, we don't face clear and present danger as they do in South Korea. We live in a world where, we face an axis of tyranny run by the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and their allies, including the North Koreans, who have been exporting instability and violence to the Ukrainian front. I'm not saying that this is justification for martial law. These are the very early hours of what's happening in South Korea. We need to be patient. We need to take a step back We need to understand what's happening. The message that I would like to convey is that I think that South Korean democracy is still strong. I know it's a strange statement under the current circumstances,
Yes.
but it's a very strong economy. This is a highly civilized and modern people. So, in a few days, in a few weeks, I think everything is going to be okay in South Korea.
Well, that would be your hope, and we will be following obviously closely. Elizabeth Braw, I know you have to go, but before you do leave us, Elizabeth, the news has now just come in that the South Korean Parliament, which has been in session as we're speaking with these rather chaotic scenes outside, they have now voted to block martial law. They've overridden the president's decision. Now, given that the military were obliged, presumably, to mobilize in response to the president's order of martial law, and Parliament has now cancelled that martial law order, will we see the military now standing down? Will that take us down from this particular curious, strange state of crisis?
Well, this is the situation that always occurs when there is a martial law imposed in any country. The situation facing the military, what should they do? Whose side should they take? And it is a dilemma for the military. Of course, we have in liberal democracies, we have a civilian law, a civilian rule over the military, so the military doesn't just go off and do its own thing. But what happens when the civilians that under whom the military operates, when they quarrel, and this is the situation we have in South Korea now, and I think it would be useful for all of us to think about how lucky we are in liberal democracies that this sort of thing doesn't happen. And here in the UK, we may complain about various things the government does wrong, that we think the government does wrong or the parliament does wrong. But at least we don't have that. And democracy is a very fragile thing, and all it takes is for somebody to overstep his or her mandate and do something out of the ordinary, and we would be thrown into a dilemma like the one now facing North Korea's citizens and possibly the military.
All right, Elizabeth Braw, I know you have to leave us. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme this afternoon. Greg, can I come back to you and pick up on that point? I mean, I'm guessing I would be right in presuming that the military were mobilised with constitutional authority on the instructions of the president. Now Parliament has stepped in and said, no, you cannot have this state of martial law. Would you expect to see the military stand down? Because otherwise we'd be looking at something like a military coup, and that hasn't been what we've been discussing until now.
It's a very tough call. The military of South Korea tends to lean conservative. We'll see how it goes. This is the kind of stuff that we see in countries not as highly developed as South Korea. My wonderful co-presenter made some very good points. Of course, liberal democracies, constitutional republics appear to be stable and not have this problem. In this day and age, I think we are facing big challenges. South Korea, of course, is on the very front lines of facing these challenges. It's going to be a very tough call for the South Korean military. Are you asking me to make a prediction?
Yes.
Okay, I think they will stay with the president. They'll stand on the side of President Yoon Suk-yeol.
Let us say then that educated guess is where we end up, and we can only, as you say, speculate at this point. Given that if you're correct, and the military side with the rather beleaguered and besieged president, where does that leave us? There's a standoff between the president and the legislature. He's at odds with his own party as well as the opposition party. Where can it go from here? Because a parliament, of course, has the authority of an elected legislature. They would order the military with their authority to stand down. The only place to go from here would be a continuation of martial law and a suspension of democracy in this democratic state in East Asia.
One of his predecessors, former President Im Young-bak, was blamed for not having cleaned up house. He left very far left-leaning individuals within government. He's trying to do that, proceed with basically clean up house from his viewpoint. That's not, of course, doing any good to Korean democracy. Again, South Korean democracy, which we have been praising for so many decades. I have been a student of the Korean Peninsula for 34 years now. South Korean democracy has been sent back to 1980, the last time martial law was declared. Was this necessary? I really think we have to be patient and understand what was truly going on. Were there any other threats? Were there any other fundamental threats to the very existence of the Republic of Korea, of South Korea, as we know it today? We just need patience. But again, as a human rights defender and advocate, this is all I can say is that this is definitely not a step forward in terms of advancing democracy and human rights. We have been advocating for unification under a free, democratic, prosperous Republic of Korea. We do want to see a return to fundamental democratic principles as soon as possible. Of course, martial law does not belong in that realm. Again, there are more facts that we need to understand here.
There are, and we will be busy in the course of the program trying to ascertain those facts and keep our listeners up to date with what is going on in a well, as you say, dramatic and rapidly moving story. Greg Scarlatoiu of the International Council on Korean Studies, thank you so much for being with us.